In today's complex environment, almost every major project, from mining to transmission lines, is contentious. Hi, my name is Allie Meeres.
And my name is Byng Giraud.
Welcome to Primary Risk, where each month we speak with the people behind the projects shaping our world.
We'll be hosting candid conversations and hearing from industry leaders, political figures, engineers, and project proponents, exploring the soft issue risks, challenges, solutions, and behind-the-scenes stories of what it took to get these complex projects across the finish line, or not.
Hello, we're speaking to you live from the traditional lands of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations.
And today we are so thankful to have Premier, I think we're going to refer to you as Premier for almost this whole podcast, Christy Clark, on today's first inaugural podcast. For over 2 decades, Christy Clark has been at the center of public life in British Columbia, a premier, a cabinet minister, political commentator, and really a trailblazer. Are a passionate advocate for our province and our country. Thank you for being here with us today. I think Byng is going to kick things off with a question.
Well, before that, we just want to say thanks for joining us for a glass of wine here on our podcast. For those of you that don't know, here at Sedgwick, we like to drink British Columbia-based wine because it is a natural resource here in British Columbia. So,
I'm delighted, and thank you. It's an honor to be your first guest.
Cheers.
So soon after promising myself I would never have another drink.
Well, I'm bad that way. Well, Christy, and I will occasionally say Premier, I apologize. So we want to talk a little about political evolution. I've known you for a while, and back in the day, you know, the young Socreds, Kevin Falcon, Steve Vanagas, Mike Spohr, 80s, 90s, you were a young Liberal and sort of had a different approach to how British Columbia should be governed. And I would say there's maybe been some evolution since then. Could you maybe talk about your evolution and how that's changed, how you might think about things we're talking about today, which are major projects and large industrial builds?
Boy, that is a long arc of time, hey, that we've known each other.
You guys are both so young.
I know, isn't it? I know, it's like we haven't aged. Well, back when we were at university, remember, my dad was a teacher, and he hated the Socreds, but also he was a federal Liberal. I grew up in this household. He ran for office for the provincial Liberals 3 times when we were at like 2% in the polls, right? Because he was one of those guys. Well, it's my job. I've got to run. So I kind of grew up in this environment where my family were kind of political nonconformists anyway, and so it was natural for me to get involved in the Liberals when I first started, because I was already involved. I was already knocking on doors and stuff as a little kid. And then I was at SFU with all those incredible guys you named. And we ended up sort of working together a lot, because what occurred to me back in those early days even was that, we are, as Liberals and as Socreds and as Conservatives, all pretty profoundly different from the other guys in the NDP. Like, we all shared a lot kind of in common around economic growth and, kind of individual freedom and some of those big picture things. And I remember I'd be hanging out with you and all those other guys and like Trish Slans and Conservatives, Danka Burek, people like that, right? And Kevin Warren Chandel, like those guys. I mean, we were all hanging out together and we were not New Democrats. So that sort of united us. But I always had that Liberal streak in me, that I just really grew up with, this idea that we could be both. We could be both caring about people, and we could be looking after the economy at the same time, which I always saw as a way to care about people. A bigger economy means bigger paychecks. Bigger paychecks mean better, stronger families.
What we saw in those days, the Socreds were, the WAC Bennett building the hydro system. That was that time, and it actually there was a bit of a break in that. There was a break maybe in the late 80s, early 90s, the 90s, up until this century, when there was a break in that building of the province. But you sort of grabbed that back, and I would say in a much more aggressive way, perhaps than your predecessors, regardless of political spectrum. And so why? Like, why did you become this? And we're going to get to this as this LNG mining premier.
Yeah, once I became, you're really asking about that period of my thinking, how it evolved before I became the premier. And I think, I had been in Gordon Campbell's government from 2001 to 2005. And Gordon was building a lot of stuff, including the Olympics and all that stuff. So I was observing all of that investment happening. And I learned in that period, although I was education minister, I learned a lot about the impact that infrastructure has. And for us, then it was schools and roads and hospitals and things like that the NDP hadn't invested in for a long time. And so then when I became premier, though, we were just at the end of the global meltdown, and we had a huge deficit and all that stuff. It was, the place was kind of a mess. Everybody was. And I thought, well, how are we going to get ourselves out of this mess? And I realized, I know, why don't we build infrastructure, which seemed to me a double benefit. One, you employ a ton of people building it. And two, infrastructure is what allows the entire economy to grow. Then that became, okay, well, we need more roads, ports, airports, so we can flow trade and give Canadians a chance to export to the world. But then we also needed to create opportunities to extract our own wealth in British Columbia that we would be able to transport through that infrastructure. And that was really the big new policy piece, I think, that we plunked on top of what Gordon Campbell was, had already done. I mean, he started the Fort Mann Bridge. I finished it, but he started it. Highway 1 all the way out to Fort Langley. He started that. We finished it. So, I can't take credit for all the infrastructure, and I wouldn't, but certainly the LNG, the mining push that we made, we actually started to get into, an oil business up in the Northeast at the very end, toward the very end, started prospecting that. All that stuff was just really to figure out how we were going to create a lot of jobs, because if we didn't, the only way to create growth is by people working and spending money, and bigger paychecks are better families. And that was the other thing we had. We had a lot of people that were living very hard lives. And the only way you can improve people's lives is by giving them the opportunity to create wealth.
You touched on LNG, and, some would call you the LNG queen. And on top of doing all the local infrastructure.
That sounds like the name of BC Ferry.
I think it maybe should be the Christy Clark LNG Ferry. I don't know. Just saying, some of them are powered by LNG now, as you know.
They are. Yeah, that was us.
That was you. Yeah. Exactly. So on top of all of the infrastructure that you built in BC, you also spent a lot of time marketing BC as a place to do business with China, with India, with other jurisdictions. What advice would you give to a foreign company coming here to invest in Canada and in BC's natural resources?
Wait until we get a better government. Well, that's not a great answer, because we always want more investment. But I work with a lot of investors now at my law firm, Bennett Jones. And so one of the things I do is I walk them through the risks inherent in investing in Canada and British Columbia. And lots of them are already here and really struggling to get anywhere. So too much of my business is about, okay, you're already here, you're feeling really stuck, and you're not able to move the project forward. How do we get you there? It should not take 10 years to get a mine project approved, like not built, approved. Like, why would it take that long? Look at LNG. We had 18 projects in the pipeline, and there's there's hardly any of the big ones left now. Most of them have gone. So I would say, I think the advice is actually better for government. Maybe I can take it from that perspective. What government needs to do is they need to have certainty in the permitting process for the timelines, which is what we had. Government officials had dates that they had to meet, so you couldn't take forever to approve something. Companies were clear on what they needed to provide. You need to have certainty about what the rules are going to be around taxation and emissions and all those sorts of things that are cost drivers in the future. Business money wants certainty. So we got tons of opportunity to invest here, but people don't want to come without knowing that their investment isn't going to provide them with some kind of a return. Like, who would do that? Mm-hmm. Who would put their money in a bank that's not going to pay them any interest on the promise that maybe one day it will pay you interest? Canada sort of looks like that to foreign investors at the moment.
Yeah, we tend to agree. We also do a lot of that work with companies from abroad and sort of helping them navigate those risks associated with building projects in early stage project development, but also late stage. And you touched on the EA process and the regulatory process. So in 2014, you as Premier at the time called for a review of the Environmental Act and the assessment process. And you said that it was too cumbersome and we needed to speed up timelines. Do you think that the new act that was instated in 2018, do you think that it's helped or hindered?
I don't see much evidence that it's helped, I have to say. I mean, I haven't, I'm not on the inside of that process anymore, but just based on what we see from the outside in terms of foreign investment in British Columbia, it certainly doesn't suggest that that anything's working. And if the LNG experience for us was, I think, it was amazing, put us on the map. Everybody knows we've got a lot of LNG here and we have a lot of opportunity to solve the world's problems, export democracy and all that stuff, fight climate change. But part of the problem is that the folks that are actually ended up doing it didn't end up with the business deal that they thought they were going to get because the government's changed. And that sends a signal all over the world. So, the Shell project, I'm really proud of that. Like, we landed the biggest single private sector investment in Canadian history. But I feel so much regret that for the Shell project, it's looking like it's going to be really difficult for them to expand past 2 trains. And how do you make it a big economic project? How do you make a return on investment for that? The problem with the Shell project for British Columbia is that investors from around the world are inside that project. It's not just Shell. It's, the Malaysians are in. KOGAS, Korea's in. Mitsubishi's in from Japan and others. So they see the mechanics of the business case there. And it's not great. That is a huge reputational blow for Canada. And that's why I think we see our foreign investment numbers just really continuing to diminish. And if we don't, the thing is, people got to remember that Canada is a big landmass, but a small population. We don't have a big internal economy. America only depends on 10% of what they produce as a trade. 80% of what they produce financially is internal because their country's so big and they spend so much money. Well, in Canada, we have to trade and we're little. So we're a small, trade-driven economy. We need the world. We need to trade with the world if we want to create wealth. And if the world isn't investing here to help us develop our resources, we will not grow. And in fact, that's what's happening now. We're starting to shrink. And that is a U-turn from where we were in 2017.
Yeah. So I want to make it a little more personal, take you back to the LNG impetus. So, I mean, LNG wasn't a new thing. It's been around for decades. But what happened in your life? What happened in politics where you were the person who had this epiphany, who had this dream to let's build this? I mean, it existed as an idea, but you took it to the next level.
Yeah.
What went on in your mind? Like, what decisions were you going through that got you to that?
Well, I got elected in 2011. Remember, as leader of my party, I automatically became the premier. And so I was sitting down with Mike McDonald, actually, who was my chief of staff, and I said, Mike, okay, we have to think about how we are going to how we're going to frame up all of our thinking. That's going to so all of our thinking about how we want to run government is going to be kind of going in the same direction. And so when I ran for premier, I ran on a family first thing. People kind of thought that was some sort of lefty, middle class mother sort of slogan. But really what it meant for me was if families have the income, the wealth that they need, they will be able to raise their children in an environment with dignity and with comfort and with food and with, it really does boil down to that, right? It's your family, however you define it, that is the basic building block of any society. So what makes fundamentally a family healthy or unhealthy? Poverty or some measure of wealth. So then next step, okay, how do we create wealth for families? And then that was a process of, we have to grow the economy. So then we're sitting down, we're like, okay, how do we grow the economy? So we go around to every single deputy. We say, we're going to have a jobs plan. Let's have a jobs plan. Figure out how we're going to create jobs. We go to every deputy minister in government. We say, we want you to come up with 5 ideas that are going to create jobs in your ministry to the deputies. And
sounds that wouldn't have gone well.
well, actually, it wasn't. And we said, don't think about what's holding you back right now. The reasons it can't be done, just the things that you think could be done. So we had guys come back with all kinds of ideas, and it was actually pretty good. Like it was surprising how much pent up idea creation there had been in government by 2011. And, governments get a little tired, right? So probably that's what happened with my predecessor's government for a while. But Steve Carr, who was the minister then of natural resources, I think, deputy minister, he says, I've got this idea. Like everybody's been talking about exporting natural gas, or importing natural gas. And, but because we might, but, I think we could probably do LNG. We could export it. I'm like, what is LNG? So he said, well, we're not allowed to do it because Gordon Campbell had these climate goals, which, kind of assumed British Columbia was going to get to net zero all on its own, which I just never, I believe that we got to fight climate change, but I never thought that, well, if British Columbia, gets down to net zero, that's not going to make a giant contribution, right? So he said, but we haven't been able to do it. I said, well, Steve, let's figure out what it's going to look like. So he comes back and he says, here's how much natural gas we have, which I think is something like 130 years of shipping 4 trillion cubic tons a year, every year before, by the time we have more gas than the world could use, like everybody will be like, I don't know, those guys.
We're living on Mars.
Yeah. You remember when Michael J. Fox got into that like car that Christopher Lloyd made, and they're filling it with like garbage and stuff, and it zipped them off into the future. Do you remember that? Yeah. That's what everybody's going to be driving before we run out of natural gas. So I just realized this could be really huge, and no one in North America, but no one was doing it. The Americans weren't doing it. Nobody was doing it. I'd never heard of it. I went up to see Ellis Ross, and he's the chief of the Heist Light. He says, yeah, we were thinking of that. So we get talking about it, and he's, okay, we're going to do it where you live. And that was how we got it going. It was literally that. We just saw an idea. We realized we had the gas. We realized the world wanted the gas. We realized LNG existed in other places in the world. There was no reason we couldn't do it here. So why don't we just try and figure it out?
That's such an important story. I mean, the idea that you freed up civil servants, freed up the bureaucracy, who have some pent up policy ideas, to come up with a good idea. Instead of saying all the reasons I can't do something, I tell my kids this all the time, tell me what you can do. Like that in itself that was the innovative decision that, allowed Steve to come forward with a great idea.
Yeah, you're probably right. It probably was Steve, because he had the idea. Byng, I have to take a second to say, I was in talk radio and complaining about, bureaucrats all the time, blah, 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 blah. And I'd always been a little suspicious of government because I always kind of think, government just really gets in the way of everything, right? I was shocked at the quality of our civil service. I mean, the people that we had at the top of our ministries, and lots of them are still there with the new guys. I mean, I think they're probably not getting the same kind of traction, but their will to want to make things better. They are doing these things for the right reasons, and they are smart and full of ideas. But, politicians hold them back, and other things hold them back lots of times too, Supreme Court decisions and all the rest of those things in the environment. But yeah, going around to every one of them and, thinking about what can we do in clean energy? Lots of good ideas there. What can we do in agriculture? How many more mines can we open? How many more fish farms can we get going? And then connecting all of that to it as a next step to Indigenous communities and thinking about, okay, well, if non-Indigenous people are struggling, maybe we should think about Indigenous people because they're really struggling. And you go to those Indigenous communities, and first thing I realized really fast, okay, the problem here is we look at the communities and we think, oh, well, if only we could stop drugs flowing into those communities, if only everybody could get counseling, if only the kids could have better education. All those things are true. But ultimately, as long as everybody is living in poverty, you can't fix those things the way you'd like to. So I had this, further eureka moment where it was like, wait a minute, LNG's all coming and all the mining is all coming from these remote communities where Indigenous people are. Let's use this as the way to stoke up wealth in their communities, because no one benefits from the acceleration of wealth in any community better than an Indigenous community does, because so many of them are so far behind. And then that became a huge motivator for me and for most of the people in our government as part of the whole project.
And most of these LNG projects now you could argue are led by Indigenous
That's right.
communities.
Yeah, you look at Cedar.
Cedar, yeah.
Cedar, LNG Canada with
Slisms.
Silisms.
Silisms.
And you know, the Squamish on the wood fiber deal, they were a key part of that.
Yep.
So that's interesting. That leap took place.
Yeah, but you know, because I would go in, I would talk to the chiefs, and I would, you know, at the beginning, and hi, you know, and they'd look at me, and they'd yell at me for a while, and they'd give me this, I'd say, what can we do to help? And they'd give me this list of like 800 things, and I would say, you know, Chief, this is a really long list. And he would look at me and go, you know what, Premier, you're the only Premier that has ever visited our community. And we've had lots of white politicians come in here and visit our communities. And you know what? None of them ever come back. So I'm giving you the full list now because I'm betting you're never going to come back either. And that really taught me, that was a really, really important lesson for me in that most of the engagement that we have done in the past with Indigenous communities has been one-off, in and out, promises, some attempt to get something done, but there's never really been collaboration. There's never been back and forth. There's never been regular communication. And so we really work to build that.
And speaking of sort of your relationships with First Nations and Indigenous nations in BC, I mean, no one has, you know, across the board, non-tumultuous relationships. So maybe you could share with us, you know, you explained your motivations behind creating partnerships and wealth generation with Indigenous nations, but what were some lessons learned with LNG, with proposed projects not going ahead and impacts to nations? And what were some lessons learned in your tenure as Premier with working with Indigenous nations in partnership?
Well, you know, I just had to get used to being yelled at first, you know, you know what I did? I would go into the community and I realized like people feel so much betrayal in those communities. And they feel like I can't speak for everyone, but I had the sense that, you know, many people would talk about, you know, all just the superficial BS that government would talk about. We're going to fix this and friends and, you know, sign agreements or whatever that nobody would ever live up to. People in Indigenous communities were just sick of us. They were sick of us. They thought we were all liars. And governments kind of had been, really. And I just thought, you know, we could go in and really create durable relationships if we were prepared to recognize that we represented everything that had gone wrong in their world when we were visiting them. And so when you realize and you actually take that on, I am a representative of everything that has gone wrong in this community. And so people are going to be hostile to me sometimes. It's not going to be comfortable at all. We're going to sit for a whole day in a circle and there's going to be crying and yelling and I'm going to hate it, but I'm going to have to do it because you have to start it. And then once we got it started and we started building trust, negotiations were not always easy, but negotiations are never easy. Like, why do we think it should be easy with Indigenous people when it's not easy with the Japanese investors at Mitsubishi either, right? It's just, you know, the talk is different. But I just got at the end of it, I was so charged up with the idea that we could, this was true reconciliation. Ending poverty in First Nations is the beginning of all reconciliation. You can't reconcile with communities that you keep in poverty, which we were doing. So that was number one. And the other part of it was, you know, I thought, okay, we're going to create this new big economic pie. There's nobody's got a stake in it yet, really, right? It's not like lumber where there's been 100 years of tenures and all that stuff. So I thought, you know, okay, so whose money are they going to get? You know, First Nations, like, it's a pie. So everybody's got to get a piece of it. I'm like, well, why don't we just give them more of government's pie? Because if government gets the money, government 99% of the time is going to just make the government bigger. So why don't we let the Indigenous people have more of the government money because they're going to spend it on their schools and their hospitals and their communities. And then they're going to start enriching members of the community. And guess what? They're going to go next door to the Ford dealership and buy an F-150. That's good for everybody in Terrace. They're going to go get a new roof on their home in Kitimat. That's good for everybody. You know what I mean? Like, they're just going to spend money. It's going to create a whole lot of consumer spending in small local communities across the province, which is fantastic for everybody, which is, I think, a way better thing than government taking the money. and spending it on government.
Yeah, well said. I mean, First Nations, Indigenous communities aren't moving, and the natural resources aren't moving. So it's a pretty good.
Yeah.
And so we're going to realize the benefit of that. It's a pretty good deal, actually. Many of the other things governments come up with, the wealth kind of flows somewhere else. But those things seem pretty stable to me. 10,000 years.
Well, and you know, Byng, when you go up there, as you have done so many, like you've spent so much time in the outback in BC, it's like you realize why the land matters so much. You know, Indigenous people say land back, and they talk about the land, and you know, most of us sort of think of it. Do they want my house? What they're talking about is colonial governments came and took away their land, which is how they produced wealth for 10,000 years. And they've no longer had any ability to be able to create wealth from the land. That's what it's about. And so I kind of, you know, when I think of them saying we want our land back, I think, yeah, okay, maybe, you know, let's figure out how we share the resources from the land so you guys can use it too, because it was yours. And letting you guys use it and develop it still means it gets developed. And we all benefit from that.
Absolutely.
Right?
So we probably got to wrap up here pretty soon, but I got one more question for you, and it's very parochial because I live in Ladner. So
man.
I talked to Glenn Clark in 1997, and I said, I don't care what you do. I don't care if it's a bridge or a tunnel or a zip line. Build something. This is 1997. So what, 27 years ago?
Glenn Clark talked to you in 1997?
Yeah, I've been around. And so here we are, bridge, tunnel, bridge. And you know, we read about what's going on in the North Shore with that water sewage
Are we
plant.
talking Massey here?
Yeah, whatever, Massey Tunnel Bridge. But government, you know, we talked a little bit about Site C before this we started on the podcast here today, and we read about some of the cost overruns on the sewage plant in the North Shore. What can we do better with government, as government, to get these things done and get them done on time?
Well, get a new government. I mean, there's that. No, I know it sounds ridiculous, right? It sounds super partisan, but honestly, we need governments, and I don't care what political stripe they are. They have to decide that they want to get things done. They actually want to build things rather than just get stuck in the mire of, we're going to consult more. And I don't know. I honestly, the reason they're not doing Massey Tunnel is because there are a whole bunch of people on the left who think that the government is wanted to build the bridge, the Massey Bridge or whatever it would have ended up being called, because we wanted to find a sneaky way to dredge the river so that we could move oil down the river or something. Like they had some kooky. Gregor Robertson talked to me about it, and he was talking to me about it. I'm looking at him thinking, what is he talking about? Like, I just thought he was crazy, right? But it turns out there are a lot of people that believe this, and I think some of them are in our current government. So that's, you know, and then there's the political side of it, which is there's not a lot of people, that many people in Tsawwassen and south of the Fraser there, where it all comes out, that vote for the NDP. So I'm not sure they see it as a good political investment. I always just saw it as a way to expand our opportunity, our chance to be able to trade more, to move more goods, and move it just outside the port of Vancouver, which is jammed. We need that for the whole country. Like the whole country is depending on that route being open and available, and we're not fulfilling our obligation to the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. But, you know, and then there's all the commuters and everybody else too. But, you know, when you're in government, Byng, you just have to decide you want to do something, and you just have to get it done. And it's actually not that hard to get things done. You have to say, here's the plan, here's the dates we're going to meet, and if you don't meet your date, you got to date with the premier, and she's going to sit down and tell you why you need to speed your things up.
Well, I think that's what was refreshing, you know, if I can be complimentary about that period of time, because I remember you had very specific goals about mining, for example. And I always compared it to when we want, like your predecessor, Campbell, we want the Olympics. So we're going to set a goal and we're going to get the Olympics. And you almost took that to the natural resource sector. Like, we're going to reopen or open this many mines. And it was a struggle, but at least we had a target.
Yeah.
And that seemed to actually move things.
Yeah, it was hard. Because, you know, the great thing about the mining community, though, is those guys are big risk takers. So we still had a lot of investment in mining back in the day. And we were speeding things up through the process. There's no doubt about that. We were still working our way through some of the Indigenous issues at the time, though, to be fair. So, you know, it probably would be a lot quicker today if we'd been still at it. But yeah, we did the jobs plan, and we said, here's how many new mines we're going to open, new or or reopen. Here's how many LNG plants we're going to have. Here's how many foreign students we're going to have. Here's how much more, how many, fish farms and agriculture. And like, we had set a goal specifically for each one. And the bureaucrats were all accountable for it. We would meet on a regular, like the bureaucrats would meet around the LNG table, the Minister of Advanced Education responsible for skills, the Minister for, whatever, environment would be there, finance minister would be there. Like everybody who had a finger in trying to make the LNG thing work, they would meet every week and sit down and figure out what was getting in the way of actually getting it done. And they would be all accountable to each other, their deputies and the ministers. That's how we got it done. And then we published the thing and we would republish it. And if people didn't meet their goals, it would be in the public document. People do that in the private sector all the time. Nobody in government ever does it. And when you do it in government, it is actually pretty amazing that people want to get things done. Because I think everybody in government does want to get things done, but the whole system, they're defeated by the system. And if you can have a map and a plan for everybody to get there and everybody's on the same path, more or less, it's way easier to get people to course correct rather than having a million new problems get out of things. It was just like simple, dumb, it's not that it's different from being a mother. You get up in the morning, you go to bed at night and you're thinking, okay, lunch tomorrow. And then you get up first thing in the morning and you pack it up. And then you're like, okay, backpack's got to get packed. You got your system, right? You got your plan for every day and who's picking up from hockey and who's doing that. It's like that, but for government.
Well, policy and accountability, and I think goal setting are some key messages from today's podcast for government for sure, and something that you certainly led. We'd love to finish off today's podcast by asking you one final question. So the title of our podcast is, of course, Primary Risk, because we're talking about what the primary risks are in building major projects. So in your opinion, what is the primary risk of building a major project in British Columbia?
Lack of certainty. Lack of rules, lack of standards, unexpected changes. All of that makes everything incredibly slow and makes it incredibly scary for investors. If you can have tax certainty, environmental certainty, timeline for approval certainty, and have some certainty too around availability of workers. There's a range of, there's probably a few more big things, but I would say, and certainty around Indigenous process. If you can have those 5 things, you can get stuff done in British Columbia and Canada.
Excellent.
And we did have those for about 7 years, 6.5 years.
We did. And Byng and I were both working at Woodfibre at the time. So we certainly saw the bureaucracy. You had a major mines permitting office at the time on the mining side, and you had a very dedicated office on the LNG side. And we met with them every single week, and every single week went through everything. And it was, it really helped get that project to where it is today.
There is one last thing that I didn't mention, which I should, and I really, because I think people sort of assume it's easy to hate government, and it is, because it's big and slow and takes our money, right? People don't like that. But what we discovered is when we put really great people into government, and things weren't really working, say in major mines, as quickly as we wanted, we wouldn't fire people. We would recruit and hire people and put them in there so that there was more capacity to get things done. And those people really make a huge difference. Like having a great government bureaucracy is one of the things that has made British Columbia work over the years. From W.A.C. Bennett, Gordon Campbell, and my government too. I just want to add that because I think I do often sort of sound anti-government, but I'm a big, big fan of government when it's working because we need it. Mm-hmm. And if government isn't working, like it's not now, look what happens.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. We know you have an extremely busy schedule.
Thanks for enjoying a glass of wine with us.
Thanks for the glass of wine. I think I'm ready for another, you guys.
All right, let's pour her another glass of wine. Please follow us to receive notifications of upcoming episodes wherever you get your podcast. Check out our show notes for references that Christy Clark made today. And new episodes will be released monthly for Primary Risk. We're excited to announce our upcoming speakers, so make sure you follow us on LinkedIn. And until the next episode.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Hi, thank you.